The air on the banks of the Wolf River in Memphis, Tennessee is thick and heavy on the evening of May 29, 1997. It hangs in the twilight, carrying the scent of mud and decay. On the shore sits a boombox, blasting the thunderous, primal chords of Led Zeppelin's Whole Lotta Love. With the music is a man, a roadie named Keith Fody, watching his friend. That friend, Jeff Buckley, a musician with a voice critics called otherworldly, is standing waist deep in the murky water. He's fully clothed in a t-shirt, jeans, and heavy black combat boots. He's laughing, singing along with Robert Plant at the top of his lungs, his voice echoing across the harbor. It's a moment of pure, unrestrained joy. Or so it seems. Then, a riverboat glides past, a tourist attraction on its way down the Mississippi. Its passage creates a wake, a series of rolling waves that travel silently toward the shore. Fody, according to his statement to police, turns his back for only a moment to move the boombox away from the coming water. When he turns back, the music is still playing. The waves are lapping at the shore. But the water is flat and empty. Jeff Buckley is gone. There was no shout, no struggle, no sound at all. Just an abrupt and total silence where a human life had been seconds before. The official report would call it an accident. But for an artist whose life was a tapestry of unresolved grief, whose music was drenched in themes of water and surrender, and who was haunted by the ghost of a father he barely knew, was it truly that simple? This is not just the story of a drowning. It's an investigation into the final, poetic moments of a genius and the dark currents, both real and metaphorical, that pulled him under. To understand Jeff Buckley's end, you have to understand his beginning. And his beginning was dominated by a ghost, his father, Tim Buckley. Tim was a celebrated folk rock musician who abandoned Jeff and his mother, Mary Guibert, before he was born. He saw his son only once, for a few days, before dying of a heroin overdose at age 28. Jeff grew up in the shadow of a myth, a man he knew only through vinyl records and stories. He inherited his father's impossible vocal range, but also, it seemed, his curse. According to his mother in the biography Dream Brother by David Brown, Jeff spent his youth moving around Southern California, a restless spirit honing his craft in private. He was a phenomenal guitarist, a student of everything from Zeppelin to Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. But he resisted his legacy. For years, he refused to even touch his father's music. The turning point came in 1991, at a tribute concert for his father in Brooklyn. Jeff, then 24, stepped onto the stage. He was a mirror image of the man he never knew. He opened his mouth and sang "I Never Asked to Be Your Mountain," a song Tim had written about abandoning him and his mother. The performance was electric, a moment of raw, public exorcism. It was, as one witness described it, like a bomb had gone off. That night, the industry took notice. He moved to New York City and began a now legendary residency at a tiny East Village cafe called Sin A. Word of mouth spread like a wildfire through the city's music scene. Here was a talent that defied categorization, a voice that could swoop from a guttural rock growl to a choir boy's falsetto in a single breath. Record executives flocked to the tiny cafe, leading to a fierce bidding war. Columbia Records won. The result was his 1994 masterpiece, Grace. It was an album that sounded like nothing else, a haunting, sprawling collection of songs about love, loss, and spiritual yearning. His rendition of Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah became his signature, transforming a little-known song into a global anthem of beautiful sadness. Grace wasn't a commercial smash hit initially, but it was a critical lightning rod. David Bowie called it one of the 10 albums he'd take to a desert island. Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin, Buckley's idol, called him the best singer of the decade. He had arrived. He had stepped out of his father's shadow and cast an even longer one of his own. But beneath the angelic voice and the critical acclaim, a familiar darkness was brewing. The ghost of his father wasn't gone. It was just waiting. Fame, for Jeff Buckley, was not a release. It was a cage. The success of Grace brought with it a level of scrutiny he was entirely unprepared for. Every interview, every review, came with the inevitable comparison to Tim. He was trapped in a narrative he didn't write. In a 1994 interview with Interview magazine, he lamented, "My father's death is a very strange thing that's been made into a circus. I've been a sideshow to it." This pressure began to manifest in his behavior. Friends and bandmates quoted extensively in David Brown's biography, described a man of extreme dualities. He could be incandescently brilliant and charming one moment, then plunge into a state of deep, isolating depression the next. His moods were volatile, swinging between manic, creative highs and paralyzing lows. This wasn't just artistic temperament. According to his mother, Mary Guibert, Jeff had been diagnosed with what was then called manic depression, now known as bipolar disorder. He resisted medication, fearing it would blunt his creative edge, the very thing that defined him. He was a perfectionist, tormented by the need to create a worthy successor to Grace. The dreaded sophomore slump wasn't just a career concern, it was an existential crisis. He was terrified of becoming a one-album wonder, of failing to live up to the myth that was now being built around him, just as one had been built around his father. The music industry itself was a source of immense conflict. He felt like a product, packaged and sold by Columbia Records. He complained about the endless touring, the promotional duties, the loss of anonymity. He just wanted to be a musician, to lose himself in the art, but the machine demanded more. He sought refuge in Memphis, Tennessee in late 1996. It was a deliberate escape from the music industry hubs of New York and Los Angeles. Memphis was authentic, gritty, a place steeped in the musical history he revered. He rented a small, unassuming house and began trying to live a normal life. He worked on new music, played secret shows at a local bar under pseudonyms, and, as his friend the musician Glenn Hansard later recounted, he became fascinated by the Mississippi River. Water was a recurring, almost obsessive motif in his art. The title track of Grace speaks of drowning, and the rain is falling and I believe my time has come. It's my time to go. The song Mojo Pin opens with the line, I am lying in my bed, the blanket is warm, this body will never be safe from harm. Still feel your hair, black ribbons of coal, tangled in my face as the river flows. It was more than just a lyrical theme, it was a psychological pull. Friends reported he would often talk about the beauty and danger of the river, of its powerful, unforgiving currents. This period in Memphis was meant to be a creative rebirth, a place to shed the skin of fame and find his voice again. But the warning signs were escalating. His bandmates described his new songs as darker, more fragmented. His behavior grew more erratic. He would disappear for days, only to resurface with tales of strange wanderings. He was a man untethered, drifting towards an edge that only he could see. The spring of 1997 was supposed to be the turning point. After months of writing and woodshedding in Memphis, Jeff Buckley was finally ready to record his second album, tentatively titled My Sweetheart the Drunk. His band, guitarist Michael Tighe, bassist Mick Grondal, and drummer Matt Johnson, were scheduled to fly into Memphis on May 29 to begin rehearsals. The pressure was immense. Earlier attempts to record the album with producer Tom Verlaine of the band Television had been scrapped. According to band members, the sessions were tense and unproductive. Buckley was reportedly frustrated, feeling that Verlaine didn't understand his vision. He was chasing something elusive, a sound that was raw and real, a definitive statement that he was more than just the Hallelujah guy, more than Tim Buckley's son. He wanted this record to be his masterpiece. In the days leading up to his band's arrival, those around him noticed a significant shift in his mood. Gene Bowen, his tour manager, described him as being in high spirits, almost manically so. He was excited, energetic, and full of plans. He had just bought a house, he was talking about getting married to his girlfriend, Joan Wasser, and he seemed genuinely optimistic about the upcoming recording sessions. On the morning of May 29, the day his band was due to arrive, this manic energy was in full force. He spent the day making calls, laughing with friends, and playing music. He spoke to his manager. He spoke to his band. Everything seemed to be falling into place. That afternoon, he and his roadie, Keith Foti, decided to kill some time before heading to the rehearsal space to meet the band. Foti, in his witness statement, said the mood was light and casual. They drove around Memphis, listening to music. At around 6:30 p.m., they found themselves near Mud Island by the Wolf River Harbor. It was a spot Jeff knew, a place he'd visited before. This wasn't a pristine swimming hole. The Wolf River is a tributary of the Mississippi, and its harbor is an industrial, murky body of water known for strong, unpredictable undercurrents. It was not a place locals would choose for a recreational swim. Yet, on this humid evening, Buckley made a decision that remains inexplicable. As the Pretenders' album Last of the Independents played on the car stereo, He declared he was going for a swim. He didn't change clothes. He walked towards the water's edge, wearing his jeans, his t-shirt, and his heavy Doc Martens boots. Foti later told investigators he was uneasy, but Jeff laughed it off. He waded in, singing. The song he chose, a decision that would be endlessly analyzed, was Led Zeppelin's Whole Lotta Love. A song of overwhelming, consuming passion. Was it a burst of pure, unadulterated joy before starting the album he'd poured his soul into? Or was it something else? A final, defiant roar against the ghosts that haunted him, performed to an audience of one, on a stage of muddy water, just as the sun began to set on his last day. The scene on the riverbank was surreal. The time was approximately 9 p.m. on May 29, 1997. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long, deep shadows across the water. According to Keith Foti's official statement to the Memphis Police Department, Jeff Buckley was about waist-deep in the Wolf River harbor, laughing and singing along loudly to the Led Zeppelin song playing on the boombox perched on the shore. He was facing the bank, looking back at Foti. The atmosphere was, by all accounts, lighthearted. Foti stated he had no sense of impending doom. Buckley was a competent swimmer. This felt like a moment of spontaneous, harmless fun. At that moment, a tugboat pushing barges navigated its way down the main channel of the Mississippi River, some distance away from the calmer harbor where Buckley was. Shortly after, a smaller recreational boat passed closer by, inside the harbor itself. Both vessels created wakes. Foti, seeing the ripples from the second, closer boat heading toward the shore, made a simple, practical decision. He reached down to move the boombox and his guitar, which were sitting on the bank, to prevent them from getting wet. He told police this action took only a matter of seconds. He turned his back to the river, moved the equipment a few feet up the muddy bank, and then turned back around. In that brief interval, everything had changed. The spot where Jeff had been standing was now just empty, churning water. The waves from the boat's wake rolled past, disturbing the surface. But Jeff was gone. Foti scanned the water, expecting to see him surface, perhaps as a joke. He called out his name. The only reply was the fading sound of Robert Plant's wail from the boombox. The silence that followed was absolute and terrifying. Panic set in. Foti screamed Jeff's name over and over, his voice swallowed by the vast, indifferent landscape of the river at night. He ran along the bank, peering into the dark water, his eyes searching for any sign of movement, a hand, a head, anything. There was nothing. The river had simply taken him. After several minutes of frantic, futile searching, Foti scrambled back to their car and called for help. The 911 call was logged at 9:22 p.m. The Memphis Police Department arrived on the scene within minutes, followed by the Harbor Patrol and the fire department. Searchlights cut through the darkness, sweeping across the opaque surface of the water. Divers were called in, but the conditions were treacherous. The riverbed was littered with debris, and the current, even in the harbor, was deceptively strong. The search continued through the night, a grim and hopeless exercise. On the riverbank sat a boombox, a guitar, and a set of car keys. The band, having landed at the airport, waited at the rehearsal space, wondering where their singer was. They wouldn't learn the truth for hours. The official report from the Shelby County Medical Examiner would later state that the wake from the passing boat likely submerged Buckley, and the undertow, made stronger by his waterlogged clothes and heavy boots, pulled him down before he could resurface. It was a perfect, tragic storm of circumstances. A moment of carefree abandon that turned fatal in the blink of an eye. But for those who knew him, who knew the weight he carried and the darkness he courted, the explanation felt too simple, too random. It left a void as vast and unsettling as the dark water that now held his secret. The news of Jeff Buckley's disappearance spread slowly at first, then with devastating speed. For 6 agonizing days, the world waited. Rescue crews scoured the Wolf and Mississippi rivers, a massive operation that transitioned grimly from rescue to recovery. The music world held its breath. His family, including his mother Mary Guibert and his girlfriend Joan Wasser, flew to Memphis, keeping a desperate vigil. On June 4, 1997, 6 days after he vanished, his body was spotted in the water near the city's famous Beale Street by a passenger on the American Queen riverboat, the very same vessel whose wake may have contributed to his death. The discovery brought a final, heartbreaking end to any hope. The autopsy was conducted by the Shelby County Medical Examiner. The findings were unequivocal. The cause of death was accidental drowning. Crucially, the toxicology report found no illegal drugs in his system and only a negligible amount of alcohol, far below the legal limit for intoxication. He was, for all intents and purposes, sober. This finding immediately debunked the lurid media speculation that had begun to circulate, the rock and roll clichés of a death by overdose or a drug-fueled stunt gone wrong. This was different. It was stranger. The official narrative was set, a tragic, freak accident. But it did little to quiet the questions. The media frenzy was intense, drawing parallels to his father's early death and framing him as the latest member of rock's pantheon of tragic heroes. He was 30 years old, just shy of the infamous 27 Club, but the narrative fit too perfectly to ignore. His mother, in a statement released to the press, was resolute. This was not a suicide, she insisted. This was a terrible, tragic accident. His bandmates and friends echoed this sentiment publicly, describing his death as a result of a moment of impulsiveness, a testament to his childlike spirit, not a premeditated act of self-destruction. Yet, behind the scenes, a more complex picture emerged. The story was so bizarre, so poetic in its tragedy, that alternative theories began to form. Fans and journalists dissected his lyrics, finding what they believed to be clues, premonitions of a death by water. The fact that he was singing Whole Lotta Love, a song about being consumed, while wearing heavy boots, seemed too symbolic to be mere coincidence. The verdict was accidental, but the case felt emotionally unsolved. Years after the news crews left and the river returned to its quiet indifference, the official story of Jeff Buckley's death remains unchanged. But the truth of what happened that night may lie somewhere between the cold facts of the coroner's report and the turbulent depths of his own psychology. The accident theory is plausible. The U.S. Coast Guard confirms that undertows in that area are powerful and unpredictable. A boat's wake can create a sudden, violent vortex. Weighed down by soaked denim and heavy leather boots, even a strong swimmer could be pulled under in an instant. This is the logical explanation. But Jeff Buckley's life was rarely governed by simple logic. To truly understand his final act, we have to look at the patterns. His diagnosis of bipolar disorder is critical. Psychological experts note that individuals with this condition often experience periods of intense mania, characterized by euphoria, impulsivity, and a diminished sense of risk. His behavior on May 29, the boundless energy, the excitement, the spontaneous decision to enter a dangerous river, aligns perfectly with a manic state. It may not have been a death wish, but a moment where he felt invincible, godlike, at one with the powerful forces of nature he was so drawn to. Then there is the art itself. Can an artist's work truly predict their demise? In Buckley's case, the lyrical evidence is chilling. His unreleased song, Nightmares by the Sea, contains the lyric, "I've been down to the water, and I've seen the face of the sea, and I'm telling you, friend, it's not the place for you and me." In Dream Brother, a song written about a friend who was abandoning his pregnant girlfriend, he sings a warning that sounds eerily like a plea to his own father, and perhaps to himself. Don't be like the one who made me so old, don't be like the one who left behind his name. 'Cause they're waiting for you like I waited for you, and they're swimming in your soul. The act of swimming in his soul, the generational curse, the pull of a tragic legacy, it's all there. It wasn't a suicide note, but it was a map of his psyche. Many close to him, while publicly supporting the accident theory, have hinted at a more nuanced view. In later interviews, drummer Matt Johnson spoke of Buckley's unresolved issues with death. The most credible explanation is not a choice between accident and suicide, but a synthesis of the two. It was likely a death by misadventure, a reckless, impulsive act carried out by a man in a manic state, who for years had romanticized the very element that would kill him. He didn't necessarily go to the river to die. But in that moment, singing to the twilight, he may have felt so intensely alive that he became blind to his own mortality. In death, Jeff Buckley became what he had so desperately resisted in life: a myth. The tragic, poetic nature of his end froze him in time, a beautiful and tormented figure forever 30 years old. The album he was working on, My Sweetheart the Drunk, was released posthumously as a collection of sketches and demos, a ghostly echo of what might have been. But his true legacy remains his only completed studio album, Grace. It has since sold millions of copies and is consistently ranked among the greatest albums of all time. His version of Hallelujah has become a modern standard, a piece of music so transcendent it feels like it has always existed. He influenced a generation of artists, from Radiohead and Coldplay to Florence and the Machine, who all cited his fearless emotional honesty and vocal virtuosity as a profound inspiration. His story serves as a dark cautionary tale about the pressures of fame, the weight of inherited trauma, and the complex, often misunderstood nature of mental illness. He was a man who contained multitudes, joy and sorrow, light and darkness, grace and chaos. In the end, the river didn't distinguish between them. It simply took him. What happened in his final moments will forever be debated. Was it a reckless act of joy? A surrender to a lifelong fascination with water and oblivion? Or simply a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time? Perhaps the only certainty is that Jeff Buckley lived and died with a poetic intensity that most of us will never comprehend. His last song wasn't a cry for help or a suicide note. It was a roar of life, sung at the top of his lungs, right up until the moment the music, and everything else, was extinguished by the silent, indifferent water. Fame hides many dark stories, but few are as haunting, beautiful, and unresolved as the final song of Jeff Buckley.